Coming up, we welcome USDA Deputy Secretary Xochitl Torres Small to our studio for a discussion on her recent visit to the Tohono Nation in southern Arizona. And it's never too early to talk finances. We sit down with the executive director of the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition about their work in providing financial education to Native communities. Plus, we journey north, where one community's ancestral game is teaching its players more than just how to have fun. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amadawahopa, thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We start today with newly announced funding from the federal government aiming to restore bison populations. Last week, Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Brian Newland announced a total of $1.5 million to be divided between 3 tribally led initiatives. Those projects will benefit the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma, the 3 affiliated tribes in North Dakota, and the Shoshone-Bannock Nation in Idaho. Sicangu Lakota citizen Troy Heinert is the executive director of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. His organization has long advocated for reestablishing herds on tribal lands.
At one time, there were millions of buffalo that roamed North America. And all of these tribes, relied on them at some point, whether that was for food or shelter or ceremonies.
Now we head to Louisiana, where some local tribes had a big visit from a well-known face. Last week, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland visited the Chitimacha tribes of Louisiana to discuss erosion on the coast caused by climate change. She took to social media to share photos and highlight a $5 million investment from the federal government to help with the issue. Haaland also visited the Coshada tribe to see that nation's efforts to restore local ecosystems. She said she was grateful to observe the, quote, outstanding opportunities for Native youth in protecting their ancestral lands and waters. Above the medicine line, a new project approval is drawing alarm and criticism. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has approved a waste disposal facility for the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories at the Chalk River facility. The site, which lies on the Ottawa River, is near several Algonquin and Métis communities. The river, which is also used for drinking water, has been an important waterway for those communities. In a CBC interview, the chief of the Kebewek First Nation said he fears the release of the waste into the water will be a health risk. While the commission reported that the site would be safe, the nearby Algonquin nations disagree, as 10 of the 11 federally recognized communities objected the site. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Our next segment is spurred by a recent visit of a high-level federal official to Indian country. Last week, Wednesday, U.S. Department of Agriculture Deputy Secretary Xochitl Torres Small traveled to southern Arizona to the Tohono Nation to announce a nearly $10 million grant to provide high-speed and fiber-based internet to tribal residents. I am joined now in our Phoenix studio with Deputy Secretary Small to discuss these efforts. Deputy, welcome to the ICT Newscast.
Aaliyah, thank you so much for having me.
You are fresh off of your visit with the Tohono Nation, and I want to hear all about it. And what I want to hear in particular is what folks had to say to you, especially those who live in rural communities, about the need for access to internet.
It was such a joy to visit Tohono O'odham and specifically where we were. It was a drive out there from being out west. It's not long, but 2 hours to get to a place where you see what it takes to truly reach Indian country when it comes to high-speed internet. Along the border in Tohono O'odham Nation, it's one of the largest Indian tribal nations in the country in terms of land covered. And so it takes a lot to get to every single connection that's out there. But because of the hard work and investments that are happening with the Tohono O'odham Utility Authority, and also with some really exciting partnerships with the Gila River Indian community as well, with their telecommunications authority. So being able to see what that work looks like on the ground. I was able to meet with the district chairwoman who was very eager to have to have high-speed internet connections to her home specifically, as well as to the entire community. Because the difference that it makes is clear, whether it's kids being able to do their homework at home instead of parked outside of a community center, or whether it's our elders being able to get the telehealth that they need in order to be able to stay healthy in the communities that they love.
I am from the Southwest, and my tribal nation of Santo Domingo Pueblo, I have a little funny story because at my grandpa's house in the village, there's one window, and all of my cousins, we all put our cell phone in the window, and we're all fighting to get the 1 bar of cell service. And now we have internet, and it is absolutely a game changer, as you just mentioned. For the Tohono O'odham Nation, can you tell us when this broadband project will be completed?
So it was a groundbreaking that we were visiting. About 60% of the project is already completed, and they are looking forward to the completion soon. Once it's done, over 400 households will be covered through this investment, over 100 farms, as well as small businesses and 4 educational buildings or schools. So when you look at the impact that will have, it will be crucial. And if there ever is a pandemic or some other situation, the kids will be just so much better prepared. And that speaks to what it means to make sure that everyone has high-speed internet service. The Biden administration realizes that that's an investment in people. That's an investment in opportunity. And it's also an investment in rural places and in tribal nations to make sure that everyone has the opportunities to get ahead.
I'm so glad that you mentioned investments, because the Biden administration has made a number of investments in Indian country, including at the USDA. I saw that just last week there's a new investment for summer EBT programs to benefit children. Of those investments, there's been a lot. Which ones stand out to you the most?
Coming from rural development, before serving as Deputy Secretary, I was Undersecretary for Rural Development. And people don't always think that rural development should be in the Department of Agriculture, but it's recognizing that making sure that there's high-speed internet or clean water or wastewater, also investing in electricity is crucial part of our agricultural communities. So some of the things that I'm most excited about are the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, which are investments in rural created energy to make our energy more efficient, but also save costs, as well as be resilient and fight climate change. So there's real opportunity out there in terms of the building of infrastructure that's happening, and we want to make sure that tribal communities are ready to take advantage of those investments.
We know that the USDA has an Office on Tribal Relations, which is something that few other agencies have. Aside from that, though, what has the USDA done to advance racial justice inside the USDA?
I'll bring up 2 examples that I think are very important. The first is our work on Indigenous foods. When it comes to Indigenous foods and protecting that heritage, it's also about sometimes fighting climate change with drought resiliency. It's also about maintaining or building new markets through the foods that have been able to be preserved in culture. So investments in whether it's Indigenous animals and harvesting and processing, or whether it's helping make sure that tribal schools can serve Indigenous foods, there's a great opportunity here. And the Office of Tribal Relations has been crucial in helping us identify those places where we can invest at the Department of Agriculture. Another example is actually back in our high-speed internet space. We've had Reconnect for many years, but in the most recent rounds for the bipartisan infrastructure law, we made significant changes in how we invested in tribal communities. We got rid of the match requirement, because even if it's a grant, it can still cost money to receive it if you have to match with other funds. And that didn't always set tribal communities up for success. So for tribes, we removed that requirement. We also saw a problem with sometimes folks were building on tribal lands without sufficient permission to do so. And so we changed our grants to make sure that anyone who was providing high-speed internet service and receiving our funds had to receive support from the tribal sovereign government first.
I want to talk about goals because we, of course, are at the beginning of 2024. Last year, ICT was closely following the legislation, the Farm Bill, because, of course, that had a ton of tribal provisions in it. But as you look forward to this year, what do you really hope that the USDA is accomplishing for Indian country?
You know, when you look at the Farm Bill, it really is a statement about priorities. And a lot of headway was made in the 2018 Farm Bill, as well as some of the work that's happened since, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act and the dramatic investments in conservation in farming, as well as in some of that energy work that I was talking about. What we've also seen is a look at what our nutrition programs can do and should be doing. And when you look at SNAP, for example, it's the first time since the 70s that the Thrifty Food Plan, which is the formula that sets your nutrition, the amount that families receive for SNAP, that it was updated to reflect the cost of food. And so it's really important that that continue, because we know sometimes when food prices increase, the families who are struggling should see that impact and be able to receive that additional support. So as we look towards the new Farm Bill, one, it's important to make sure that those families receive the assistance that they need, and also that we're continuing to get out those investments with the Inflation Reduction Act, and that those funds stay focused on conservation and energy resilience and the impact that they're having right now.
We know that the work and the leadership that you do at the USDA is very wide-ranging. So I want to give you the space to maybe talk about something I didn't ask you, or maybe something else that comes to mind that you really want to talk to Indian country about.
You know, when it comes to the United States Department of Agriculture, there's incredible history, and there's a lot of work still yet to be done. That's why I'm proud that the Office of Tribal Relations that President Biden has set up is taking a look at our programs. And whether it's through the lens of the Farm Bill or whether it's through the lens of implementing Inflation Reduction Act, we are actively looking to how we can serve tribal nations and Indian communities in a different way, in a better way that reflects that partnership, that reflects that sovereign government-to-government relationship, and that's investing in people all across our country.
Well, Deputy, we thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
For many, home ownership is out of reach, but for Indigenous people across the country, there's help. The executive director of the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition is Christy Finsel. ICT's Shirley Snavy reports.
Interest rates are falling, but it's still daunting for many families to think about buying a home. One organization is trying to help. The Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition assisted 81 families over the past year with down payments. It issued a white paper to document this work.
We thought that the findings would help contribute to a national conversation about what's working in terms of the Native asset building field or the Native asset building ecosystem in terms of supports for tribal citizens as they purchase homes.
ONAC's executive director is Christy Finsel. She said a layering approach of lenders working together was a key finding.
You know, how can we include all those partners to talk about what loan products are available to tribal citizens that are residing in urban and in rural areas? Because as we know, there are a lot, and the majority of tribal citizens are in urban areas. And so how are we going to, offer them loan products that work? So those are just some of the takeaways, and we think those have some policy implications in terms of the loan products that are available nationally. And we just hope that this data will contribute to this national conversation, and we're happy to keep talking.
Many ONAC services are available nationwide to assist Native Americans, including financial education and tax preparation. In Lincoln, Nebraska, Shirley Snavy, ICT News.
Visiting with family and relatives will help us from feeling lonely or socially isolated. COVID-19 changed everything, like our ancestors who survived war, famine, and epidemics. Our elders had to make sacrifices too. The more we are socially connected with our family and community, the less health problems we will have and the longer we will live. We need to stay active to keep our spirits alive. Remember, you are not alone. Connected together, we will stand strong. For more information on elder isolation or caregiver resources, go to connectedindigenousElders.org.
The Snow Snake Games are making a comeback as a community in the heart of Ojibwe country hopes to revive a tradition that had been slipping away. Our partners at Discover Wisconsin have more.
This may go as far back as in the last glacier period, where the snow snake or the spear process was used to harvest animals even way back then. Everybody who wants to play the snow snake, you know, they all gather up and they stand in line there and we take turns. And the person who throws that snow snake longest down that track, they are the winner. There's no seconds, there's no thirds, because there's no seconds and thirds out there in real life if you're out there trying to bring back game, for example, for your family to eat. You don't get a second throw. Not to be saddened about the loss and then not to be too braggart about the winning. Snow snake is there to enjoy together. The Ho-Chunk has always been known as a very strong, vibrant group of people. Our communities remain strong, even though there had been concerted efforts to remove us from this area, concerted efforts to remove us of our culture, you know, and our ways of life. And yet by staying together as a tight-knit community over here, we support each other. These games play an important role even for us, you know, to assure that our children realize that, you know, this is something that we can lay claim to here ancestrally. The process actually, you know, comes from the ancient form of using spears and such in chase of prey. You get a, you know, herd of deer sitting in a waist deep of snow there. Well, a snow snake works perfectly for, you know, sending that spear along the edge of the snow there and harvesting, you know, an animal mid-winter. Some have mentioned that this may go as far back as, you know, the last glacier period, where the snow snake or the spear process was used to harvest animals even way back then. So what you want to do is go select the wood, make sure it's fairly straight-grained, and then begin to render it down into a shape where there is some form of head on that snake. What is as important as the shape of it is also sometimes what you place upon it for your own personal effects. You'll see a variety of our snow snakes, for example, will have, whether there's applique on it or a snow snake face or something that you hold near and dear to your heart, your own initials, for example, so you don't lose it in the monks of snow snakes. And then you begin to try to make sure that the bottom half, for example, is as smooth as it can be. And then the key to a good running snow snake is, in fact, is how you protect and preserve it, whether you use some type of linwood seed or something that repels water. But that final layer is where you want to really assure that you have either a nice clear varnish on it or that you pick your secret wax, right, that you place on the bottom of it so that it runs efficiently across the snake. We have been stripped from a lot of our culture and placed as people that are scattered about amongst their own ancestral areas. And that assimilation still plays heavily upon us today. You know, in 2015, we decided to reincorporate the snow snake back into the tribal communities for the Ho-Chunk. and realized that it was a really fun, enjoyable opportunity for us to get together as communities. Our youth were able to come out there and stand right alongside their parents and their grandparents and just enjoy something to break that long period of winter that we experience in Wisconsin. Here we had this 8-year-old throw it 110 feet, and he actually won. At 110 feet, I can't even throw a softball 110 feet anymore at my age there too, but it's nice to see these youth, taking advantage of something and experiencing something new that they may not experience anywhere else. It was kind of nice to see my daughter, my youngest daughter at that, to see her come down there on her own free will, for example, to, come down there and enjoy, the outdoors. This is what parents live for. We weren't just sitting in our Japoda caves or our lodges throughout the winter doing nothing at all. We enjoyed all 4 seasons just as much, if not more, than the peoples around us. That we were a lively, very vigorous people out there. And we didn't survive. We excelled in living in this region. We've did it for thousands of years in this area, and we're continuing to do it for the next 1,000 years, we're in hopes of.
Before we move on to our next segment, we would like to note that last story was about the Ho-Chunk Nation instead of the Ojibwe people. A new exhibit and catalog launches this week in Minneapolis, Minnesota. ICT's Shirley Snavy visits with professor and curator Brenda Child.
Dreaming Our Futures premieres this month at the University of Minnesota. It features Ojibwe and Oceti Sakowin artists and knowledge keepers. Brenda Child is one of the curators and joins us today. Welcome, Dr. Child.
Thank you very much.
This is the inaugural exhibit of the George Morrison Center for Indigenous Arts. I have the catalog. It's stunning. Tell us about the project.
We really tried to make the exhibit catalog for this kind of first venture of what we are calling the George Morrison Center for Indigenous Arts at the University of Minnesota, a very special catalog. And we want it to kind of reflect the work that we do at the university, not just in the Department of Art, but in our longstanding Department of American Indian Studies. And so we had some pretty interesting folks contribute essays to the book. But we also, one of the things you might notice is that when we feature some of the artists, the 29 artists who are participating, artists always make these interesting little statements about their work and their background. And we wanted to make sure that they were translated into Ojibwe as well as Dakota, because those are the two, not just indigenous languages of Minnesota, but the two languages that we teach our students at the University of Minnesota. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of featuring that work in our exhibit catalog, that we're not just saying, oh, native languages are important, but it's a really important, significant part of our the work that we do with our students at the university. So we wanted to kind of make sure that's a feature of future exhibits as well as this exhibit catalog.
There's a number of public programs that will highlight the work and the artists. Particularly, I'm interested in the February 2nd Horizon Seminar, Art and the American Indian Citizenship, 1924 to 2024. Tell us about that.
That's the 100th anniversary of the Snyder legislation, making Indian people citizens of the United States. And so we have to kind of remember that complicated history of Indian people here in our region, but also across the United States, and think about those big moments in Indian history as kind of part of our programming.
This exhibit is extremely political.
Yes, I think it is quite political. And so that kind of started a conversation here. And what it made me realize is how excluded we are in many places in this country, and especially in Minnesota around the arts, or historically how we have been excluded. And so I talk about, I use actually an illustration by my husband, Steve Primo, who when the Capitol building reopened in St. Paul, they asked me to come in and give a lecture. And I was just telling him about it, just sitting here telling him about it. He drew this wonderful cartoon about Alexander Ramsey, who was still alive when the cornerstone was laid for the Minnesota Capitol. And it shows in this kind of political cartoon, Ramsey laying the cornerstone, but sort of on the bodies of Dakota people, right? And so you can look at history, you can look at our recent history. I think of like the great artist Jim Denomy's work that's also featured in the exhibit. There's a lot of political commentary on our region and the politics of Minnesota and the United States that takes place in this exhibit. And whenever you get artists together, you're going to have that, I think.
See Dreaming Our Futures in Minneapolis until March 16th. It then travels to Rochester and finishes the year in Duluth, Minnesota. Shirley Snavy, ICT News.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.